think there's a lot at stake here. And I'd like to, if it's all right, for a few minutes, just take questions and give you a chance to ask me anything.
Don't be shy. I know you all. You're very opinionated.
Question, term limits. In the contract with America, wasn't term limits one of the issues? And looking at Senator Stevens there from Alaska and some of the others, I think there's a bit of, if I could say, arrogance, distance from the American people.
Yeah.
Should we be fighting for term limits?
Yeah, so we had term limits in our proposal. We brought them up for a vote as we promised to. We did not get a constitutional majority. We did term limit the chairman of the committees, which I think was a good step in the right direction. And I have always personally favored a 12-year term limit because I think that that's long enough that members can learn how to govern and learn how to be involved. But I think there's actually a usefulness to having turnover. And there are lots of talented people in America, not just the current 535.
As well as from the judiciary?
Judiciary. I am less concerned about term limits for the judiciary. I think there are lots of ways for the Congress to control the judiciary without having to limit terms. I am for, as I said a while ago, the abolition of the Ninth Circuit, which I think would send an appropriate signal. I am for the Congress and President on occasion blocking off certain topics and saying the courts can't deal with them. And I think we have a number of ways to communicate with the judiciary. That remember, in the Federalist Papers, the judiciary is supposed to be the weakest of the three branches, not the strongest. And there is no place in the Constitution and no place in the Founding Fathers for suggesting that the Supreme Court was in any sense the ultimate defender of the Constitution. In fact, Jefferson said flatly that that would be an oligarchy because you'd have 9 appointed people making decisions. He said that clearly can't be true. Yes, sir.
I agree with you in principle about the candidates and the direction we need to go, but I thought George Allen probably did the best job of looking to the future and technology and new opportunities, and yet he lost. I don't know if you followed that closely, but what were your thoughts on that race?
Well, other than the fact that the media was deeply, vehemently opposed to him, and that one mistake got drug out for, I think, 43 days by the Washington Post, the other was you had to draw a big contrast from day one. If you cannot beat liberal Democrats in a clinch, they are tougher than Republicans, they are better debaters than Republicans, they have all the advantage of the news media, and so you've got to beat Democrats by keeping a distance. If you study the Reagan campaigns, Reagan made vividly clear the differences. I actually argue that Republicans need to learn to slow down. You'll never win by trying to run at the pace of the news media because they're opposed to it. And so you just got to slow down and widen the gap. I remember in 1984, I was in a truth squad in San Francisco for the Democratic Convention. And we were having press conferences every morning to explain what the Democrats had done wrong. And some of you will remember Walter Mondale got up in his acceptance speech and he said, the other guy is going to raise your taxes, but he won't tell you he is. But I promise you, if you elect me, I will raise your taxes. We closed our operation. We didn't want to get between Mondale and the American people. We understood an old Woodrow Wilson rule: you should never murder a man who's in the process of committing suicide. We didn't want a second issue. We were happy to say for the following 60 days, like higher taxes, vote Democrat. Like lower taxes, vote for Reagan. The average American looked up for 12 seconds and said, let me get this straight. More money in my pocketbook, more money for Walter Mondale to spend. Really hard choice. We need to slow it down to a handful of big truths. Because if you try to run a cluttered campaign, they'll win. Yes, sir.
What can the people do to prevent the destruction of good folks who want to run? I can't imagine Mr. Cox wanting to leave his business and run for public office and offer to get destroyed by the media.
You don't know John Cox.
I'm actually not very sympathetic with fear of the media. George Washington was the best-known military leader in Virginia when he was young, and thought he was sort of a hero, and ran for the House of Burgesses at a time when candidates bought drinks for everybody on Election Day. And Washington announced grandly that he was not going to buy drinks because he was confident that his neighbors would make the right choice. And he came in 6th. At the next election, he spent the largest amount of money ever spent on buying alcohol. And by the way, Washington is the only president to have owned a distillery, which they opened this week up at Mount Vernon. I mean, this is a man who understood his trade, okay? All of the founding fathers, professional politicians, every one of them ran for office. Every one of them understood campaigning. All of them understood the process of winning public opinion. Washington got so mad at the news media in 1792 that he almost quit and went home because the New York newspapers were attacking Martha for holding high teas, and they thought that was a sign that she was monarchical in her interest. And he was so enraged that it took both Hamilton and Jefferson to convince him that America needed a second term to stabilize the country, and he couldn't do it. So if Washington had a hard press, I just think this is the business. And what you have to say in the end is, look, I'm here to talk to you about the things that are going to matter to you and your children and your grandchildren and your community, and here are my ideas. And you just stay on it. And after a while, I'm convinced that politics only becomes as trivial as the politicians tolerate. And Lincoln's the greatest example of this. You go back and look at Lincoln, who got attacked all the time, but he didn't spend any energy on the attacks. Lincoln focused on his message and what he was communicating and what he needed to get across. I also cite Robert E. Lee, who at one point in 1863 wrote a note that said, "I had not realized how many great generals that we had in the Richmond newspapers." And as I read their editorials written in hindsight, I realize how much better they would have been in command. And I am tempted to allow one of them to head the Army of Northern Virginia for a while I write the newspapers. But I'm not sure they will do quite as well looking forward as they do looking back. It's a great column and explains a lot about Iraq.